It was a warm evening at Mar-a-Lago, the grand estate known for its grandeur and the power it symbolized. The soft hum of the ocean waves was the only sound that filled the space as chandeliers glowed overhead, casting a warm, golden light across the polished marble floors. In the private lounge, away from the public eye, sat two of the most powerful men in the world, Elon Musk and Donald Trump. Tonight wasn't supposed to be anything extraordinary. It was supposed to be a quiet dinner. Donald Trump had invited Musk for a private meeting to discuss everything from AI to space exploration. The two titans of industry, always on the pulse of what's next, were known to have deeply unpredictable minds. And yet, there was one more presence in the room: Musk's young son, X. X was sitting between them, his small feet swinging slightly from the chair. His piercing blue eyes, so similar to his father's, were filled with an intensity that few would expect from a boy his age. Elon Musk had brought him along unexpected, but not entirely surprising. X had insisted, and Musk had shrugged. Might as well, he thought. Trump, ever the charmer, had laughed and agreed, the kid's got better taste than most politicians. The conversation began innocently enough: talk of politics, the upcoming election, and the economy. Musk, ever the visionary, spoke passionately about artificial intelligence and automation, warning of the risks of losing control over the direction humanity was heading. Trump, leaning in, with a glint of his deal-maker spirit, asked, "So, what's the move, Elon Musk? You planning to run for something, or just pull the strings from the sidelines?" Musk smirked, the tension in the room palpable. "I prefer to build things," he replied, ever the engineer. Trump chuckled, "That's what they said about me before 2016. The exchange was light, playful, but charged. These were two men who had reshaped the world in their own ways, yet had never quite confronted each other in such an intimate setting. But then, the unexpected happened. X, who had been quietly listening, tilted his head and looked directly at Trump. His voice was soft but unshaken as he asked a question that stopped the room dead. "Mr. Trump," he began, "are you afraid of being forgotten?" The question hung in the air like a heavy weight, and for a brief moment, the room was still. Musk paused mid-sip, glancing at his son. Trump's face froze for a second, a quick flicker of something passing through his eyes. Was it surprise? Regret? Musk noticed, but Trump quickly recovered, bursting into that signature laugh, part performance, part amusement. "Forgotten?" Donald Trump chuckled. "Kid, I've got my name on buildings from here to Scotland. They'll be talking about me long after we're all gone." But X didn't blink. He didn't smile. "That's not what I mean," he said simply. Trump raised an eyebrow, intrigued but slightly confused. "Oh? What do you mean then?" X leaned forward slightly, speaking as though this question had been rehearsed in his mind 100 times. "I mean, when people talk about you 100 years from now, what will they actually say? Will they just remember your name, or will they remember who you really were?" For the first time in the conversation, Trump paused. His usual bravado faltered, and the words didn't come instantly. Elon Musk stayed silent, watching as Trump wrestled with the question, his eyes narrowed in thought. This wasn't just a challenge, it was a moment of introspection. Trump finally let out a slow breath. "Well, kid," he said, his voice now more measured, "the trick isn't making people remember your name. It's making them remember why you mattered." X tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing with quiet intensity. "And why do you think you matter?" he asked. Trump's fingers stopped tapping the table, And for the first time all evening, the self-assured former president didn't have an immediate answer. There was a long pause before he spoke again, his voice quieter, almost reflective. "I woke people up," he said. "I made people realize that power isn't just for the elite. That they don't have to listen to some journalist or politician they can fight." X's expression didn't change, but his mind was working. He had been listening closely, absorbing every word. "So, you think you've changed the world?" he asked. Donald Trump leaned back slightly in his chair. "I did," he said firmly. "I made them listen." There was another pause. Musk, always the observer, watched his son's reaction. X, who had been asking these questions all night, wasn't finished yet. "But being remembered isn't the same as being understood," X said, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. Trump went still. Musk's gaze flickered toward Trump, his mind working as he processed his son's words. X had struck a chord, a deeper, more profound chord than anyone expected. The silence in the room deepened. The conversation was no longer about politics or the future of technology, it had become about legacy, about what truly matters in the end. Trump looked at Musk, then back at X. There was a shift in the air, something neither of them had expected. X, with his calm, steady voice, had changed the direction of the evening. And as the ocean waves crashed outside, the sound of them seemed almost like an echo of the deeper question that had just been raised: would history remember the victories, or would it remember the true essence of who they were? As the evening progressed, the conversation shifted toward more pressing matters. The initial shock of X's question had subsided, but the underlying tension between Musk and Trump remained. Musk, always the innovator, was eager to dive deeper into their shared interests: technology, the future of humanity, and the role of artificial intelligence in shaping the world. Trump, however, had a different lens through which he viewed everything: power, influence, and the art of negotiation. Their differing perspectives clashed, but in a way that was strangely magnetic. Musk leaned forward, his eyes bright with passion as he spoke about artificial intelligence. "We're at the precipice," he said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "AI has the potential to either save or destroy humanity. The choices we make today will shape the future. If we don't act wisely, we risk losing control forever." Trump, who had been casually swirling the whiskey in his glass, set it down and locked eyes with Musk. "So, what's your move, Elon Musk?" he asked, his tone shifting to one of curiosity mixed with challenge. "You gonna run for something, or are you just gonna pull the strings from the sidelines?" Musk chuckled softly, the tension in the air palpable. "I prefer to build things, Donald," he replied with a smirk. Trump's lips twitched upward in a brief smile, but it didn't last long. "That's what they said about me before 2016, he shot back, leaning in, his voice taking on that familiar, almost conspiratorial tone. "We both know that's not enough. At some point, you've got to make a move. You've got to lead." Elon Musk didn't flinch, his expression still calm. "Leading doesn't always mean running for office," he said. "Sometimes, it's about innovation. About creating something that changes the world without the need for politics." Trump's eyes narrowed slightly, studying Elon Musk with a mix of admiration and skepticism. "You know, that's exactly what they said about me before the election. I was just a businessman, not a politician. But look at me now." The conversation was starting to feel like a game of chess, two minds circling each other, each calculating the other's next move. But just as Trump prepared to respond, X spoke again, his voice cutting through the growing tension like a knife. Do you think, X began, his words deliberate and calm, that it's enough to just change the world with technology? Or do you have to change the people first? Trump blinked, caught off guard by the question. Musk, too, paused. Neither of them had expected X to ask such a profound question, one that reached beyond the scope of their current conversation. Trump looked at the boy, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then, he let out a low chuckle. Kid, you've got a lot of questions, he said. But I'll tell you this, it's not just about making people listen. It's about making them believe you matter. Making them understand what you've done for them. Musk's eyes flickered between X and Donald Trump. He could see that his son was onto something, something that neither he nor Trump had yet fully grasped. But, Musk interjected softly, being remembered is one thing, but being understood that's a whole different challenge. Trump's gaze shifted from Musk to X. There was something in his eyes now, something that suggested he was starting to see the conversation in a new light. Yeah, maybe. Donald Trump said, his voice quieter, more thoughtful than usual. Maybe it's not just about power. Maybe it's about making people feel something real. X nodded slowly, processing the weight of Trump's words. And if you can't make them feel it, he asked, his voice unwavering. Trump leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers against the table, a rhythmic sound that filled the silence. He was really thinking for the first time that evening. Then, he said slowly, maybe you've lost them before you even had a chance to win them over. The room fell into a heavy silence, the sound of the ocean waves crashing against the shore outside the only noise. X, with his unyielding curiosity, had turned the conversation into something far deeper than any of them had expected. Musk watched his son, impressed by the way he had managed to turn a simple dinner into a profound reflection on life, legacy, and the true meaning of success. Trump finally broke the silence, his voice carrying a hint of respect. I'll tell you one thing, kid, he said, glancing at X, you're gonna be a force to reckon with someday. You've got a mind that doesn't just think, it challenges. And that's something most people are afraid to do. Musk smiled faintly, his pride in his son evident but unspoken. He gets that from me, he said, his voice light but filled with a deep sense of truth. Donald Trump raised an eyebrow. Does he, now? Elon Musk nodded. Partially. But he also gets it from himself. X, who had been quietly observing the exchange, finally spoke again. So, what happens now? What do we do with all these questions? The room seemed to pause, as if everyone was waiting for an answer, a resolution. But there was no simple response. The questions lingered in the air, unanswered but not unimportant. The conversation had shifted, leaving everyone with more to think about than before. The waves continued to crash outside, the rhythmic sound echoing the ongoing reflection that now filled the room. Musk and Trump, for all their differences, had found themselves in a rare moment of shared understanding. And X, with his calm yet profound insight, had shown them both that sometimes, the most important question is not about what you achieve, but how you make people feel. And with that, the evening continued no longer just a meeting, but a turning point for all three of them. The silence stretched on, the conversation shifting like the ebbing tide outside. Trump, Musk, and X sat in an uneasy stillness. The grand room at Mar-a-Lago, usually bustling with energy, now felt like a sanctuary of deep reflection. X's question had landed like a stone in the water, creating ripples of thought that continued to circle through everyone's minds. Trump's usual bravado had faded, replaced by something more introspective. It was clear that his mind was not on his next political move or the empire he had built, but on something far more personal. X's words had forced him to confront an uncomfortable truth. In the end, it wasn't enough to be remembered for your name, your buildings, or your victories. What really mattered was how you impacted the people closest to you. And that was something Donald Trump had never truly stopped to think about. Elon Musk, too, felt the weight of the conversation. He had always been driven by the future, by space exploration, by technological advancements, by the next big breakthrough. But his son's question had stirred something in him. Musk had always prided himself on changing the world, but the truth was, he had been so consumed by his work that he had neglected the ones who mattered most. His own family. X, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, spoke again, his voice quiet but resolute. What if we're all so focused on changing the world that we forget the people who matter to us? Trump's eyes narrowed slightly as he turned toward the boy. There was no immediate response, but his mind was working, turning over the question in ways he hadn't before. He had spent so much time building, expanding his empire, and securing his legacy, but had he forgotten the real impact he could have on the people he loved? Musk felt a pang in his chest as he turned to his son. X's words were like a mirror, reflecting a truth that had been buried under years of ambition. He had built great things: Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, but at what cost? How many birthdays had he missed? How many moments had he let slip away, thinking that he was working for the greater good, when in reality, the greater good was sitting right in front of him? The sound of the ocean outside seemed to grow louder, as if the universe itself was urging them to confront this moment. Trump, for the first time that night, seemed at a loss for words. It wasn't that he didn't have answers, he always did, but for once, he didn't know how to respond. He looked at Musk, then back at X, and found himself questioning his own choices. "You've got a point," he finally said, his voice softer than it had been all evening. "Maybe the world doesn't care about the name on the building. Maybe it's about the way people remember you after you're gone." Musk nodded slowly. He could see the change in Trump's demeanor. There was a vulnerability in his voice now, something Musk had rarely seen. Trump had always been a fighter, a man who prided himself on winning at all costs. But now, the words that hung between them weren't about winning or losing, they were about the lasting impact of their choices. X, still sitting calmly, spoke again, his voice steady but filled with purpose. "It's not enough to just be remembered. You need to be understood. Because if people remember you but don't understand why you did what you did, then maybe all your achievements mean nothing." The weight of X's words hung in the air, and the conversation took a turn toward the personal. No longer were they debating AI or space. Now, they were debating the very essence of what it meant to live a meaningful life. Trump shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. "You're asking some tough questions for a kid," he said with a wry smile, though it lacked its usual edge. "But maybe that's the problem. We don't ask ourselves these questions enough. We get so caught up in the race, in the fight, that we forget to ask what we're really fighting for." Musk, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. "I've asked myself those questions," he admitted. "But it's hard to come to terms with the fact that you can build an empire and still feel like you've missed out on the most important things in life." Trump glanced at Musk, his expression softening for a moment. "It's not too late," he said, almost as if he were reassuring himself as much as Musk. You can still change things. We can still make a difference, maybe not in the way we thought we would, but in a way that actually matters. X nodded, his eyes wide with understanding. It's about what you leave behind. Not buildings or money, but the people you've touched. The people who will remember not just your name, but the way you made them feel. Elon Musk looked at his son, pride swelling in his chest. It was rare to see someone so young grasp such profound truths. X had a way of cutting through the noise, getting to the heart of the matter. And as much as Musk had tried to shape his son into a thinker, he now realized that X had already surpassed him in many ways. Donald Trump, too, seemed moved. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ocean outside. For the first time that evening, he wasn't thinking about his next move, his next deal. He was simply thinking about the legacy he would leave behind. Maybe you're right, he muttered, almost to himself. Maybe it's time to stop fighting the wrong battles. The room was quiet now, each man lost in his own thoughts. But there was a shift, a realization that had been sparked by X's simple yet profound question. The fight for legacy, for significance, wasn't about power or prestige. It was about the impact you had on the people around you, the ones who would remember you long after your name faded from history. Musk exhaled deeply, feeling a sense of clarity he hadn't had in years. I've missed a lot, he said, his voice quiet but filled with resolve. And I don't want to miss any more. Trump nodded, his usual sharpness returning. Well, then, he said with a small smile, we've got work to do. The waves crashed gently against the shore outside, as if echoing the promise of new beginnings. And in that moment, three men each with their own powerful legacy had begun to question what truly mattered in life. And maybe, just maybe, they would all leave behind something even more valuable than anything they had built. And so, the conversation continued, not as a business meeting or a political debate, but as a moment of self-reflection, a shift in perspective. The questions X had asked had changed everything. And the answers still unknown would shape the future in ways none of them could yet imagine. The conversation lingered in the air like an unresolved chord. After X's piercing question about legacy and impact, a subtle shift had taken place in the room. No longer was the focus on the technological advances of SpaceX or the political strategies of Trump's campaigns. Instead, the conversation had veered into uncharted territory, one of personal reflection and emotional depth. The evening had started with a sense of grandeur, a casual gathering of powerful minds discussing their futures. But now, the power dynamics felt less pronounced. There was a vulnerability that had settled over the group, especially with Donald Trump and Musk, two of the most public figures in the world, who had always projected certainty and control. But now, they found themselves facing questions they had never fully answered. Elon Musk broke the silence first, his voice quieter than before, almost as if he were speaking to himself. I've built rockets, he said softly. I've launched satellites, sent cars into space. But at the end of the day, does any of that really matter if I'm not here to share it with the people who matter most? His words hung heavily in the room. Donald Trump, who had been watching Musk closely, leaned forward, his gaze sharper than before. It was rare for him to hear such open vulnerability from anyone, especially Musk. For a moment, Trump said nothing. Instead, he mulled over Musk's words, the echo of his own experiences with his family surfacing. Finally, Donald Trump spoke, his voice quieter than it had been all evening. I know what you mean, he admitted, almost reluctantly. I've spent so many years climbing the ladder, trying to build something that lasts, but when I look back, there's a lot of things I've missed. People I should have fought harder for. The air between them shifted. Musk, who had never expected to hear such words from the former president, nodded slowly. He could relate. But what Trump said next startled him even more. "Do you know what I regret most?" Trump asked, his voice lowering as if sharing a secret. "It's not the deals I didn't close or the elections I didn't win. It's the relationships I didn't fight for, the ones that could have been better if I hadn't been so focused on winning." Musk didn't know how to respond. He had never seen Trump so vulnerable before. The man who had spent decades in the public eye, unshaken by controversy and criticism, was now revealing a side of himself that few, if any, had ever seen. X, who had been listening intently, leaned forward slightly. "So, you think it's too late to fix those things?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with the wisdom of someone far older than his years. Trump paused, considering the question. He tapped his fingers against the table, a familiar gesture of thought, but this time there was no bravado in it. "It's never too late, kid," he said, his voice thick with sincerity. "But sometimes, you realize a little too late what's really important." Musk watched the exchange between Trump and his son, feeling the weight of the conversation settle over him. There was something about the honesty between the two men that felt different. It wasn't about business or power, it was about something deeper. Elon Musk had spent his life looking ahead, always thinking about the next big challenge, the next technological leap. But what if that wasn't enough? What if the real work was right in front of him? Donald Trump looked at X, then back at Musk, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You've got a thinker here," he said, nodding at X. "I've got to admit, I didn't see that coming." X smiled faintly, his expression unreadable. "I've been thinking a lot about what matters," he said simply. Musk felt a strange sense of pride mixed with guilt. Pride because X was shaping up to be far more insightful than he could have ever imagined. Guilt because he realized how much he had overlooked in his own life. His son had, in a matter of hours, made him rethink everything he had ever believed about success and legacy. "Sometimes," Musk said, almost to himself, "I think we get so caught up in building things that we forget what truly matters. But maybe it's not about building empires. Maybe it's about building relationships. About making the people who matter feel seen and heard." Trump, for the first time in a while, nodded in agreement. "That's the real challenge, isn't it?" he said. "It's easy to win the game. But it's a lot harder to win the people who matter." X, who had been quiet for a moment, looked up at both men. "Maybe that's the point," he said. "Winning the game isn't enough if you've lost the people who really matter along the way." The room fell silent once more. The ocean outside continued its rhythmic crashing against the shore, the sound almost soothing, as if echoing the realization that had just occurred. There was no grand solution to the questions they were grappling with. There were no quick fixes, no easy answers. But in that silence, each of them was coming to terms with the idea that true success was not about building things that lasted, but about building connections that endured. Trump broke the silence first. "You know, this isn't how I thought the night would go," he said with a chuckle. "But I'll admit, you've both got me thinking." Elon Musk smiled faintly. "I'm not sure I've got any answers yet," he said. "But I think I'm ready to start asking the right questions." X, who had been silently observing the exchange, looked up at his father. "It's never too late, right?" he asked, his voice gentle. Musk's gaze softened as he looked at his son. "No," he said quietly. It's never too late. As the evening drew to a close, the conversation shifted again, this time toward lighter topics. But the shift in the dynamic between the three men was undeniable. Musk had always been driven by a singular focus: innovation, progress, and technology. But now, he found himself reflecting on the importance of the people who walked with him through life. Trump, too, was rethinking the way he had lived his life, his usual sharpness softened by the unexpected vulnerability that had emerged in the conversation. And X, for all his quiet wisdom, had helped bring about this change. In a few simple words, he had changed the course of the evening, turning it into something that would leave a lasting impact on everyone in the room. As the three of them sat there, the distant hum of the ocean filling the silence, it became clear that the evening had shifted them all, perhaps not in ways they could fully understand just yet, but in ways that would ripple through their lives in the days to come. The night had fallen silent again, but this time, the silence wasn't heavy with unresolved tension or questions left unspoken. There was a quiet understanding now, a kind of peace that had settled in the room. The grandeur of Mar-a-Lago, once a symbol of wealth and power, now seemed almost irrelevant in comparison to the weight of the conversation that had unfolded. Trump, who had spent years managing the chaos of his public life, seemed smaller now, less imposing. Musk, usually so absorbed in his work, had been forced to confront the cost of his relentless ambition. And X, his young son, had become the quiet catalyst for their realizations, with his simple but profound questions that had cut through the noise. Musk was still processing the evening, his mind racing, yet slowing as he considered everything he had heard. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to step back from the world he had created: the rockets, the electric cars, the neural interfaces, and focus inward. He thought about the moments he had missed. The birthdays. The first steps. The quiet dinners he had skipped, always with the excuse of tomorrow. But now tomorrow felt like something fragile, uncertain. He turned to X, who sat quietly beside him, his expression serene but full of understanding. "You know, you've asked a lot of hard questions tonight," Elon Musk said, his voice more reflective than usual. "Questions that I think I've been avoiding for a long time." X met his father's gaze, his eyes unwavering. "It's not about the answers, Dad," he said softly. "It's about knowing that the questions are worth asking." Musk's lips twitched into a faint smile. "I'm starting to see that." He glanced at Donald Trump, who was leaning back in his chair, still thoughtful but with a look of quiet respect. "You're right, Donald," Musk continued. "It's not just about what we build. It's about the people we're building it for." Donald Trump nodded slowly, tapping his fingers on the table as he processed Musk's words. "You know, I've been asked for years about what it takes to be remembered," Trump said, his voice steady but tinged with a hint of vulnerability. "People want to know how to leave a legacy, how to make an impact. And all I've ever said is, build something big. Make them look at you. But now, I'm starting to think that maybe, that's not enough." X spoke again, his voice calm but firm. "People will remember you for what you made them feel. Not just what you built. Because buildings crumble, businesses change hands. But feelings last. They shape who we are and what we do." Trump let out a long breath, as if something heavy had been lifted from his shoulders. "I think you're onto something, kid. I spent so much time trying to be larger than life that I forgot to be human. I forgot to connect with the people who really mattered." Elon Musk glanced at Trump, a new sense of understanding between them. The man who had built an empire through brashness and bold decisions was now speaking about the human side of life. Musk had never thought he'd see the day when Trump, of all people, would express such vulnerability. X's words had done something neither of them could have anticipated. The boy had become the bridge between two powerful minds, leading them into a territory they had never ventured before, the heart of what truly matters in life. The conversation shifted, but this time it felt different. There was no longer a need to prove anything or come up with clever retorts. It was no longer about who was right or wrong, it was about understanding, about facing the uncomfortable truths that lay beneath their success and ambition. X, ever observant, had been watching both men, sensing the transformation taking place. "I think," he said slowly, "the real question isn't whether you'll be remembered. It's whether the people who matter will understand who you really were. If they can't, maybe that's the part that really scares you." Musk turned his gaze to his son, his eyes filled with both admiration and a deep sense of gratitude. X had put words to something that Musk had never been able to articulate, something that had been gnawing at him for years. Trump exhaled sharply, rubbing his hand over his face as he processed the weight of X's words. "You know, you might be right about that. I think I've spent so much of my life focused on winning, on making sure my name would live on, that I never stopped to wonder if I was doing it for the right reasons." There was a pause. Trump leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his face more serious than it had been all night. "I didn't come here tonight expecting to have this kind of conversation," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm glad it happened." Musk nodded slowly, feeling a shift inside himself. "I think we all needed it," he said quietly. "Maybe it's time for me to start thinking less about what I can build and more about who I'm building it for." The conversation had come full circle, from ambitions of technological supremacy to the simple but profound truth that without the people you care about, everything else loses its meaning. Donald Trump and Musk, each with their own complex legacies, had begun to recognize that the real value of their achievements wouldn't be in the things they had built, but in the people they had changed along the way. As the night wore on, the trio fell into a comfortable silence. There was no longer any pressure to continue talking, no desire to fill the air with noise. Each man, in his own way, had come to terms with the deeper meaning of their lives and work. The soft sound of the ocean waves continued to fill the room, a gentle reminder of the passing of time. X, who had said so little, had managed to change everything. His simple questions had peeled back the layers of pride and ego, revealing the human core of both Musk and Donald Trump. And in doing so, he had shown them that sometimes the most important thing in life wasn't about reaching for the stars, but about understanding the people who were beside you on the journey. As the evening came to a close, Elon Musk stood up, his thoughts still swirling but his heart feeling lighter. "I think I've got a lot to think about," he said, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Trump nodded, his eyes softer than they had been when the evening began. "We all do, kid," he said, looking at X with newfound respect. "But it's never too late to start." The three of them left the room together, not as figures of power or fame, but as men who had been forced to confront something far more significant, the kind of legacy they would leave behind, not in buildings or business deals, but in the lives they touched. And as they stepped into the night, the future no longer seemed so distant. It was here, in the quiet moments, with the people who mattered most. The following days were heavy with contemplation. After the profound exchange at Mar-a-Lago, both Musk and Trump found themselves grappling with thoughts and reflections they hadn't anticipated. The questions X had posed lingered in their minds, unanswered but not forgotten. Each man had returned to his usual routine, but the weight of the conversation had subtly altered the way they saw everything. Musk had always been a man of action, moving forward with precision, speed, and an unwavering focus on the future. But for the first time in years, he felt himself slowing down, questioning not just what he had built, but why he had built it. The relentless pursuit of success, of reaching Mars, of advancing artificial intelligence, of revolutionizing transportation had always been his mission. But now, with every quiet moment and every reflection, Musk was left wondering, at what cost? Trump, too, found himself in a similar state of self-reflection. Known for his unshakable confidence and larger-than-life persona, the conversation had forced him to look beyond the facade he had so carefully crafted. Despite his many victories, there was a gnawing feeling in him now, a question that had never been asked before: was he truly understood by those closest to him? The tension in the air was thick with unspoken words. Musk found himself thinking more about his children. How often had he been absent during crucial moments? How many times had he sacrificed family time for the sake of progress? The late nights working on projects, the constant pressure to innovate, to be the best, it had all come at a price, and Musk had been blind to it for far too long. The weight of his absence in his children's lives haunted him. As for Trump, the thought of his own children and the strained relationships he had at times with those closest to him weighed heavily. The success he had achieved, the wealth he had accumulated, and the name he had carved into history, what would it all mean if it wasn't shared with the people who had stood by him through it all? It was X's simple but profound question that had cracked open something they had both spent years protecting, an image of themselves that was untouchable, invincible. But now, as they sat in their respective spaces, the walls they had built began to crumble. One morning, Elon Musk sat down at his desk in his office at SpaceX, the hum of the building's activity around him barely registering. His computer screen blinked with a list of tasks, meetings, and projects, but none of it seemed as urgent as it once had. He felt an overwhelming pull to take a step back, to focus on the things that had always been waiting for his attention, patiently sitting on the sidelines of his ambition, his family, his children, the moments that had passed him by. He sat there for a long time, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. His assistant's voice crackled through his phone. "Elon Musk, we need your decision on the Mars mission launch date," she said, her tone crisp and professional, oblivious to the turmoil brewing in Musk's mind. But Musk was no longer focused on the mission. His thoughts were elsewhere, on the missed birthdays, the milestones he had only seen in photos, the times he had told his kids he would be home soon but never made it. He exhaled deeply, his fingers finally tapping the keyboard to schedule a meeting, not about space, but about something much closer to home. He dialed his son, X's phone number, his heart beating slightly faster than usual. He had never been one to show much vulnerability, especially when it came to matters of the heart. But something about the conversation with Trump and X had changed him. He knew he had to make things right, to stop putting everything before what mattered most. It was time to listen, to understand, and to be there. Donald Trump, too, had spent the next few days reflecting, but his self-examination had been a little more chaotic, marked by moments of impatience, frustration, and confusion. The truth he had confronted about his relationships with his family was not an easy one to accept. He had spent decades building a public persona that demanded attention, but what about the people who had been there for him in private? He walked into his office one morning, the hum of activity outside his office door, the soft rustling of papers, and the distant sound of phones ringing. His eyes settled on a photo frame on his desk, one of his children, when they were younger, smiling up at the camera. That was before the many public battles, the media storms, the divisiveness. He reached for the photo, his fingers tracing the edges of the frame. For the first time, the image didn't feel like a victory, it felt like a reminder of the relationships that had frayed over the years. Maybe it's not too late, he muttered to himself, recalling X's words. Maybe I can fix this. He picked up the phone, dialing one of his children. It wasn't an easy conversation, and he didn't expect it to be. But something had shifted in him, something he couldn't ignore any longer. The drive to rebuild his relationships, his legacy had overtaken everything else. Later that evening, Elon Musk and Trump found themselves sitting in a restaurant in New York, away from the cameras and away from the usual chaos. Musk had called Trump earlier in the day, suggesting they meet not to discuss politics or business, but to talk about something far more personal. They sat across from each other, the soft murmur of other patrons filling the background, the clink of glasses, the subtle sounds of life moving on around them. It was a rare moment of peace for both men. Musk was the first to speak. "I've decided," he said, his voice low but resolute. "I'm going to take a step back from some of my projects. I've been so focused on building the future that I've missed out on the present." Trump looked at him, his expression unreadable at first, but then it softened. "You know," Donald Trump said, leaning back in his chair, "it took me a long time to realize that I wasn't just building buildings. I was building a family. And I've spent too much time ignoring them." There was a long silence, the weight of their shared reflection filling the space between them. Finally, Trump spoke again, his voice quieter, but with a trace of something close to sincerity. "It's never too late, right? To make things right." Musk nodded slowly, his mind filled with a mix of emotions. "No. It's never too late," he said. "But we have to start somewhere. And I think it's time." For the first time that evening, both men were at peace with the decisions they were making. There was no fanfare, no dramatic conclusion. Just a quiet understanding that sometimes, the most important thing to do wasn't to conquer the world, it was to rebuild the connections that had been neglected. And so, as the evening wore on, Musk and Trump shared their final thoughts, their voices softer now, more reflective. The world they had once tried to change through forceful action and ambition was now something they hoped to influence differently. The journey ahead would not be easy, but it would be one worth taking, for it was a journey of understanding, healing, and rebuilding the very relationships that had always mattered most. And for the first time, both men felt ready to face what lay ahead, not as leaders of nations or empires, but as fathers, sons, and men willing to make things right, starting with those they loved most. The following days after their meeting in New York felt like a slow but meaningful unraveling of the past. Both Musk and Trump had made decisions that went against everything they had known, but deep down, they felt a sense of peace in their choices. It wasn't about walking away from their careers or their responsibilities, but about rediscovering the true meaning of success, one that was no longer just about accolades or accomplishments. Musk's office, once a place where he spent countless hours developing his ideas, now seemed distant to him. He found himself taking more walks, spending time with X, and re-evaluating the path he had taken. He knew the decision to step back wouldn't be easy. There was still so much to accomplish, so many frontiers to explore. But every day, the pull to be present in his children's lives grew stronger. He started small. He made more of an effort to attend school events, even if it meant rescheduling important meetings. He took time to sit and listen to X's thoughts, something he had long overlooked in his pursuit of building a better future. Each conversation with his son felt more like a gift than a duty. They talked about everything from science to philosophy, from dreams of space travel to the more grounded realities of relationships. X had a maturity beyond his years. He didn't just ask questions to provoke thought, he asked them because he genuinely cared about the answers. Musk was beginning to realize how much he had missed by focusing so narrowly on his goals. It wasn't just his son he had neglected, but his own humanity, the part of him that connected with others on a deeper level. Meanwhile, Trump found himself navigating a similar journey of introspection. His schedule had always been meticulously planned, his days filled with meetings, press conferences, and public appearances. But lately, he had found himself questioning the cost of all that. The relentless pursuit of power and influence had created a legacy built on ambition, but it had also eroded some of his most cherished relationships. He had spent so much time fighting for the future that he had forgotten to nurture the present. He took time to reach out to his children, each call a step toward rebuilding the emotional distance that had crept in over the years. The conversations weren't easy, there was still a lot of hurt, unspoken words, and unresolved conflicts, but with each one, a bridge began to form. He understood now that it wasn't about grand gestures or monumental decisions, it was about the small, consistent acts of love and respect that had the power to heal wounds over time. For Trump, the real turning point came when he sat down with his daughter. It wasn't a formal meeting or a discussion of business, it was simply a father and daughter talking about life, about family, about the future. The conversation didn't have any earth-shattering revelations, but it marked something profound in both of them. Donald Trump listened, really listened, for the first time in years. "I know I've been distant," he admitted, his voice tinged with regret. "But I'm here now. And I want to be here not just physically, but emotionally." His daughter didn't say much at first, but when she did speak, it was with a tenderness that surprised him. "We've always known you were busy," she said softly. "But it's good to know you're trying." It wasn't an easy moment, but it was a start. A new beginning, built on the realization that true connections aren't made through power or prestige, they are made through vulnerability, understanding, and presence. As for Elon Musk, he had an epiphany one afternoon when he was sitting with X in a park, watching the world go by. The simple act of being present with his son, not distracted by work or the demands of the future, felt like a profound act of defiance against the very thing that had once consumed him, the need for constant achievement. "Do you think we can make it to Mars one day?" X asked, his eyes bright with curiosity. Musk smiled softly, his usual quick wit not present for once. "I think we can," he said. "But maybe the most important thing right now is making sure we're present for the people who are right here with us." X nodded, taking in his father's words. "I think that's a good start." Musk couldn't help but laugh softly. His son, with his perceptive mind, had hit the nail on the head. They both knew that the dream of space travel would still be there, waiting for them, but the present, this moment with his son, was something that couldn't be taken for granted. For the first time, Musk allowed himself to enjoy the simplicity of life, the small moments that made up the bigger picture. And, as it turned out, those moments, those precious, fleeting moments, were the ones that brought the most joy. In the same way, Donald Trump found himself revisiting his past, understanding the importance of the bonds he had overlooked. As he spent more time with his family, he realized that, for all his achievements, it was these relationships that truly mattered. His legacy wasn't going to be built on towers or deals, it would be built on the foundation of trust and love he rebuilt with those he held most dear. One evening, as they sat in the quiet of the Mar-a-Lago estate, Elon Musk and Donald Trump had another conversation. This time, it wasn't about politics or the future of humanity. It was about the present and what truly mattered. "I've spent so much time trying to get to the top," Trump admitted, his voice softer than usual. "But now I realize that the climb isn't nearly as important as the people you bring with you." Musk nodded, his thoughts reflecting the same sentiment. "I was so obsessed with building the future that I forgot to live in the present." Trump looked over at Musk, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Seems like we're both learning that the hard way." Musk smiled back, the warmth between them genuine, for the first time without any pretense or ambition clouding their exchange. "Maybe that's how we get to the real future," Musk said, his voice thoughtful. "By understanding the past and appreciating the people who are with us right now." Trump's eyes glimmered, a hint of something akin to peace crossing his features. "I think you're right." The conversation ended there, and for the first time, neither man felt the need to add anything more. It was the silence of understanding, of acceptance, of growth. And in that moment, both Musk and Trump knew that while their legacies were still unfolding, the foundation of those legacies had been irrevocably altered. The true measure of their lives, and the lives of those around them, would not be in the things they had built, but in the love they had shared and the relationships they had nurtured. As the evening drew to a close, the world outside seemed to continue at its usual pace, indifferent to the internal shifts taking place in the hearts of two powerful men. But inside, something had changed quietly, profoundly. And both Musk and Trump knew that they were now on a different path, one that led not to greater achievement, but to greater understanding. As the weeks passed, the changes within Musk and Trump became more evident. They were no longer the same men who had walked into that quiet dinner at Mar-a-Lago all those days ago. There had been subtle shifts in their perspectives, in the way they approached their work, and most profoundly in the way they interacted with their families. Musk's new approach to life, the deliberate slowing down of his once unyielding pace, began to ripple outward. He made more time for attending events he had previously dismissed as too small or insignificant. There was a noticeable warmth in his interactions with his son, a sense of presence that Musk had never truly embodied before. One afternoon, Musk and X found themselves walking through a park near their home. Elon Musk had come to appreciate these quiet moments more than he ever had before. The idea of simply being in the moment, observing life as it unfolded without rushing ahead to the next big thing, was something Musk had to teach himself. "Do you remember the time we went to see the sunset last year?" X asked as they strolled along the winding path. "You told me that the future was what we had to focus on." Musk smiled softly, the memory clearly still vivid in his mind. "I do," he said. "But I think I've come to realize that the present is just as important. It's the only time we actually live in." X nodded in understanding, his eyes thoughtful. "I think I like that," he said quietly. "The present is the part we can change." Musk looked down at his son, a wave of pride swelling in his chest. X had always been insightful, but now, in this moment, he seemed to understand something profound about life that Musk himself was just beginning to grasp. "You're right," Musk said, his voice carrying a new layer of warmth. "And maybe the future will take care of itself if we focus on the right now." Meanwhile, Trump, too, was navigating this newfound understanding of life. After the heart-to-heart with his daughter, he had started to reach out more. The distance he had once maintained with his children, perhaps even unknowingly, began to fade. He was still the same Trump, the sharp negotiator, the man who thrived in the spotlight. But now, there was a shift, an earnest desire to make amends where he could and rebuild bridges that had once seemed too far apart. Trump found himself on a long call one evening with one of his sons, the kind of call he hadn't made in years, just to talk, no agenda, no purpose other than reconnecting. The conversation was simple at first. They talked about the old days, about the things they used to do together, and about how life had changed. But then Trump found himself opening up in ways he hadn't in a long time. "You know," Trump said, his voice quieter than usual, "I've been thinking a lot about the past, about when I wasn't around as much. I know I wasn't the easiest person to be around, always focused on my next move, but I want to change that." His son's response was measured but sincere. "I know, Dad," he said softly. "It's been tough, but I see you trying. That matters." Trump paused for a moment, absorbing the weight of his son's words. It wasn't an easy conversation. The past wasn't something that could be undone, but it was a start. It was a recognition that the only way forward was through honest communication and presence. As the call ended, Trump looked out of his office window, the weight of the city outside still palpable, but the heaviness inside had lightened. The realization that his relationships were just as vital as his career and public persona had taken root in him. There would still be battles, still be work to do. But for the first time, he understood that the legacy he left wasn't just about power or wealth, it was about the connections he made, the people he loved, and the impact he had on those closest to him. The ripple effect of these realizations continued, slowly but steadily, touching every aspect of their lives. Elon Musk, having found a new rhythm in his personal life, began to understand that balance didn't mean compromising his ambitions. Instead, it meant redirecting his focus, making space for the things that truly mattered: his family, his relationships, and the moments that couldn't be rushed. Work was still important, but it no longer dominated his entire world. For Trump, the journey was less about finding balance and more about unlearning old habits. The years of relentless ambition had taught him to view success through the lens of power and control. But now, he was beginning to view success differently, not as something you chase, but as something you cultivate in the relationships around you. One evening, they both found themselves on a call again, this time not about politics or business, but about their families. "I'm starting to understand what you meant the other day," Donald Trump said, his voice calm and more reflective than it had ever been. "The real victory is the one you don't see coming. It's the quiet moments that matter most." Musk nodded, hearing the sincerity in Trump's words. "I've been learning that too," he said softly. "Success isn't about the next big thing. It's about what we do with the time we have, the people we love, and the things we choose to make space for." There was a long pause, a moment of unspoken understanding between them. No words were needed, for both men had found clarity in the truth they had been seeking all along: the future would unfold in its own time, but the present, the moments spent with loved ones, the conversations that mattered, was what truly shaped the future. As the call ended, both men sat back in their chairs, a sense of fulfillment they had never before experienced slowly settling over them. Their legacies, they now understood, would not be defined by their wealth, their achievements, or their names etched on buildings. It would be defined by how they had chosen to be present for the people they loved, by the lessons they had learned, and the relationships they had rebuilt. It wasn't a dramatic conclusion, no earth-shattering event that marked the end of their journey. Instead, it was a quiet, profound shift, one that had been years in the making. But they both knew, deep down, that they had changed. And that was enough. The ripple effect of their decisions had started small, but it was beginning to reach farther than they could ever have imagined. The future they had once tried to control had been replaced with something more meaningful, a deeper connection to themselves and the people they held dear. And with that understanding, the possibilities felt endless. The ripples of change that had started with a simple dinner conversation continued to expand, touching not just Elon Musk and Donald Trump, but also the people closest to them. With each passing day, they both found themselves more present, more engaged, not just in their work, but in their relationships. For both men, the journey of rebuilding wasn't just about making amends, it was about rediscovering the importance of the people who had always been by their side. Musk, having reprioritized his life, started to understand the true essence of leadership. It wasn't just about leading companies or pushing the boundaries of human potential, it was about leading by example within his own family. The countless hours spent working on SpaceX or Tesla had been important, but now he recognized that the foundation of any great venture, any meaningful success, was rooted in the strength of the relationships you maintained. X had become not just his son, but his guide. Musk's realization that his family needed him, that the love and trust between them had to be cultivated daily, became a driving force in his life. One evening, after spending the afternoon working on a personal project with X, Elon Musk found himself reflecting on the things he had missed, moments so simple, yet so important. As the two of them sat together, side by side on the porch, watching the sky turn shades of pink and purple, X spoke again, his voice casual but filled with that depth that Musk had come to admire so much. "You know," X began, looking up at his father, "there's something you've been telling me for a while now about pushing the boundaries of what's possible. But you've never told me why you're doing it. I mean, yeah, Mars is cool, and the tech is amazing, but why?" Musk paused, caught off guard by the question. It was one he hadn't fully asked himself before, despite his relentless pursuit of progress. X wasn't asking to challenge him, he was asking to understand. And that made all the difference. Musk thought about the question for a long moment before answering. "I guess I always thought that reaching Mars, creating the next big tech revolution, that was the way to make the world better. To ensure humanity had a future. But is it the future you want?" X asked, his eyes searching his father's face, the question carrying an unexpected weight. Musk smiled, a sense of understanding beginning to take root within him. "No," he said quietly. "It's not just about Mars, or the tech. It's about giving people the chance to dream again. To realize that anything is possible if we work together. But you're right. The future I want is one where we don't lose sight of the things that matter most right here on Earth." X nodded, a quiet satisfaction settling over him as he heard his father's response. "I think that's what I've been trying to say all along," he said softly. Musk smiled at his son, feeling a surge of gratitude. The clarity that X had brought to him, the way he had helped him focus not just on the grand visions, but on the personal, the tangible, the connections that truly mattered, was invaluable. Meanwhile, Trump, too, was experiencing the same type of clarity, though his journey had been different. The bridges he had been working to rebuild were not just with his family, but also with his public image. For so long, Donald Trump had defined himself by his public persona: strong, outspoken, and always in control. But with every passing conversation with his children, with every acknowledgement of the emotional distance he had created, he began to see a new path. He had started making a concerted effort to be present for his children, not just in the big moments, but in the quiet ones, too. One afternoon, he found himself sitting in a small cafe with his son, enjoying a cup of coffee. It was simple, far removed from the corporate boardrooms and rallies that usually filled his day. But in that moment, it felt like everything. "Remember when we used to do this when you were younger?" Donald Trump asked, his voice softer than usual. "Just sit and talk about everything and nothing at the same time." His son looked at him, the corners of his mouth turning up in a faint smile. "Yeah, I do. You were always so busy, but I always appreciated those times." Trump's heart tightened slightly. It wasn't that his son had never been appreciative, it was that he hadn't realized how important those moments were. In the past, he had seen time with his children as a luxury, something that could be sacrificed for the sake of his career. But now, the simple act of being present felt like a gift he had neglected for far too long. "I'm sorry I wasn't there more," Trump said, his voice steady but with an honesty that was rare for him. "I was so focused on building everything else that I missed the most important thing, the people who were here all along." His son nodded, a quiet acceptance in his eyes. "It's not too late, Dad," he said. "I see you trying now, and that's what matters." It was these small, genuine moments that began to heal the distance that had existed for so long. Trump wasn't trying to fix the past, he couldn't. But he was trying to make sure the future would be different. His legacy wasn't just going to be about his business empire, it was going to be about the relationships he rebuilt, the time he spent with his family, and the people who truly mattered. As the days turned into weeks, the connection between Trump and his children deepened. The phone calls, the simple conversations, the time spent together, each moment added to the foundation of a new, stronger relationship. And for Trump, it was a reminder that no matter how much time had been lost, it was never too late to start over. Musk, too, began to see the importance of these small moments, these everyday interactions. The pursuit of the future didn't need to come at the cost of the present. In fact, it was the present that made the future meaningful. The memories he made with X, the lessons he learned from him, were becoming the cornerstone of a new kind of success, one that was measured not by accolades or recognition, but by the love and connection he nurtured within his family. The lessons that Elon Musk and Donald Trump had learned were not just about themselves. They were about the people they loved, the people who had always been there, waiting for them to see what truly mattered. As they continued on their journeys, each man with his own unique vision for the future, they knew that the road ahead would be different. It wouldn't be about rushing toward an end goal, but about appreciating each step along the way. And so, as they stood on the precipice of their legacies, the future ahead seemed less daunting, more hopeful. They had learned that the true measure of a life well lived wasn't about grand achievements or far-reaching ambitions. It was about the moments that defined the relationships they had, the people they touched, and the love they shared. The bridge between ambition and connection had been rebuilt, and both men knew that the journey they had embarked on was one worth taking slowly, thoughtfully, and with the ones who mattered most beside them.